I wanted to start just with a quick prayer. Lord, help me to see this morning. Lord, help me to hear this morning. And Lord, help me to think this morning. And God, I ask you to help me speak this morning. Amen. Today's sermon title is Deep Cries Out to Deep. And of course, I take it from Psalm 42, the 7th verse, where the psalmist said, "Deep cries out to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. All your waves and breakers have swept over me." It makes me think of when the psalmist says, "Lord, where will my help come from?" Or when the prophet said, "Lord, where is your face?" When Moses, after leading his enslaved people out of Egypt, was tested day and night and facing certain death, and then being told that God's very spirit was going to be removed from the people because God was angry. And Moses felt so torn. And in his own state of that depression, he asks to simply see God's face, to find comfort in God's presence. And God made a deal with Moses that when God would pass over the mountain and Moses was hidden in the cleft of the rock, then Moses could look upon his back. And so Moses did. It reminds me also not only of Moses, but thinking of the prophet Elijah. Deep crying out to deep. When Elijah had been targeted and run out and was sought to be killed, like the thousands of other priests and prophets, by a cruel queen, and Elijah felt really alone. He felt like he was the only one, and he felt God had abandoned him. Deep cried out to deep. And in that moment, when he felt most discouraged, that he would just rather die, that God called Elijah out from the cave where he had been holed up, took him outside. And if you remember the story, a gale force wind swept over the mountain. Elijah was looking to see God, but God was not in the wind. And then the earth began to tremble and quake and move, and the rocks were moving, and God was not in the earthquake. And then you remember a fire all of a sudden started up all around him, and these flames jumping everywhere, and surely God would be in the fire, but no, God was not in the fire. And it wasn't until after all of that dissipated, all of that violence, all of that signs of power in this world, it all just dissipated and disappeared, and a gentle, quiet whisper blew into Elijah's ears. And that's where God was. But there's something about deep crying out to deep that words cannot explain. An expression that talks about the inarticulated parts of our lives, when our soul cannot begin to explain itself. When something so deep and primitive inside of us needs to be connected to its creator. Deep cries out to deep. This week we saw something that many of us have not seen in this country before, not in our lifetime anyway, and certainly not at that level. The intentional hostility and the visceral hate and disgust, and all of it laced with an unequivocal tone of racism. And most importantly, we should call out white nationalism or white supremacy. How these could all be bedfellows is not a surprise for most of us, but it did disgust us, and it rocked many of us to our core. This idea of dominance through force, the subjugation of others who may have an ideological difference. That is the polar opposite of our own understanding of inclusion. It is diametrically opposed to what Martin Luther King called the beloved community. Dr. King said, "The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community." It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It is this type of understanding goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of all humans. End of quote. Love is no easy word. And many largely white churches this morning will be calling for calm and love and calling for prayer, the standard go-to when we feel so paralyzed by events or confused by politics. I too feel that our community will benefit from love and prayer, make no mistake. But I would also like to describe what that love entails, as shown to us through Jesus's own life on this earth. And it's really not a philosophical or esoteric discussion or debate about what would Jesus do. We can simply look at what Jesus did and surmise how to proceed in our own doing, our own walking and being on this earth. How we can lead the way towards healing. And we can even try to embrace what we talked about last week by being the kingdom of heaven, being the tree. So I offer to us three things, three dimensions, if you will, of love that as Jesus showed it. Number one, love without prejudice. Unabashedly, unashamedly. It doesn't matter who or what is happening. Err on the side of love. When the Roman centurion came to Jesus asking to heal his friend, some say servant, some say lover, Jesus did not hesitate, not even for a second. He recognized where deep cries out to deep. And the scripture says he got up immediately to go and heal this man's man without a question. This is how we ought to be. Quick to action. No more thinking, no more pondering, no more processing, no more wallowing in indifference or ambivalence or paralysis. No, we ought to be loving with urgency. The Roman centurion was a pagan, living a lifestyle certainly not mainstream, and he represented a race and government that was oppressing Jesus' very people. But Jesus didn't care. He didn't care about any of that. In that moment, he saw deep crying out to deep. He put politics aside completely. He put religion far to the side as they knew it at the time. Jesus responded to a human need. God's child in need of God's help. And that's what Jesus did. To go relieve the suffering of someone this man loved dearly. When deep cried out to deep. Number 2, love is ugly. You know, our pains go beyond words, beyond expression. They are deep and they are ugly. There's nothing polished, nothing elegant, nothing eloquent, nothing beautiful, nothing romantic about that love, our needs and deep pains, all of that. So when love comes out to meet deep, crying out to deep, it is not necessarily pretty. It is ugly. When Jesus was going to visit the Gerasenes and he went across the Sea of Galilee, he arrived to go to the village. And as we know the story to be, a man who was living among the dead, he had been outcast from the village. We call him the man among the tombs. He was completely isolated, where he lived in squalor, naked, killing, trying to kill himself, hurting himself every day, cutting himself with stones, screaming. This man somehow found himself and threw himself at Jesus' very feet as he stepped off of the boat to go to the village. Love is ugly. It's not necessarily pretty. And here was this man, probably in his own dried blood, holding on to Jesus' feet. Jesus stopped everything that day, and he never made it to the village, where he could have healed many, maybe, because this man who had been thrown out by society was all that mattered at that moment. I'm sure his disciples complained, Jesus, there's so many other people, nice-looking folks, waiting just down the road, people that also need him. But no, Jesus spent all the day with this man who was written off in life. Jesus recognized deep, crying out to deep, and he answered. Number 3, love your persecutors. Now, when Jesus was being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he would be executed, Peter tried to defend Jesus, even cutting off one of those approaching men, hit one of his ears, right, as the story goes. And what did Jesus do? Well, we know the story. He picked up the ear and he healed the man. He restored him. And then he gave a lesson to Peter. But this is the beauty of Jesus teaching us to love even those who would do us harm by being a healer. And that's what Jesus did. He recognized even in that person a deep that needs and cries out to deep. Jesus would take that, this is the night before his very execution, he would take that to the cross, where he would then, even those who were executing him, pray for God to forgive them. Now that is love. A love that is indescribable, a love that people don't understand, a love that is strange, seemingly, in this world, or at least in society. A love that those at the Capitol this week will not understand. Because this love is so deep, so giving, and so real, it understands deep crying out to deep. White nationalism and patriotic insurrection, or whatever this is being called, they have no place in a beloved community. Arrogance, cynicism, antagonism, belligerence, hostility, and violence, they have no place in the beloved community. We must be bold in standing up for those who are persecuted. In love, we must stand up. We must be urgent in reaction to aid others. And we must be intentional in our steps as we step forward. We must heed the voice of those who are suffering the most, where deep cries out to deep. Every minute of every hour, of every day. The marginalized, the poor, the destitute, those among us who are still systemically oppressed. Deep cries out to deep. Jesus said, for what you do for those who are at the bottom, you do for me. We can invert that. And the inverse would be, for those that you do at the top, you do for yourself. Did you catch that? For those that you do at the top, you are doing for yourself. But for those you do at the bottom, you do for me, Jesus said. Meaning for God. Let our community be a beloved community. Let us hear the depths of the cries of the suffering, the pain from both our past and our present, and let us stand up alongside those who truly suffer in our nation, and somehow let us love all and lead in the way of doing it. Do not be afraid. And I'm going to play a video from a short music video called Stand Up. And it's from the movie Harriet Tubman. If you have not seen it, you will see parts of it here. It is an amazing film and about an amazing person. And if you're not inspired to stand up after watching this video, I hope that you are. But if you're not, watch it again. Find it on YouTube. Thank you. Shalom.
Where is she?
Come on back, peaceful.
Whoa, easy now.
I'm gonna be free or die.
I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Weight on my shoulders, a bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
You have made it 100 miles to freedom. Would you like to pick a new name to mark your freedom?
Harriet Tubman.
Early in the morning, before the sun begins to shine, we're gonna start moving towards that separating line. I'm wading through muddy waters. You know I got a made up mind. And I don't mind if I lose any blood on the way to salvation. And I'll fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river.
to the Underground Railroad.